Stop it. Hang on. Oh, no, it's all right. Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to speak with Nathanial Bibby today, who is a LinkedIn guru. You've probably heard about him. And if you're like me, you might even feel like you know him since he's always on LinkedIn telling us stories and whatnot. So welcome, Nathanial.
It's fantastic to be here. Thank you.
So the first question I love to ask people is the dreaded question of if you were at a barbecue and someone said, "G'day, mate, what do you do?" How would you explain what it is you do?
Okay, well, I would say I help businesses get more customers by using social media. And then that normally says, well, what do you mean? Like Facebook, Instagram? And I say, well, have you heard of LinkedIn? Because unless they're in a white collar job, generally they're not necessarily familiar with LinkedIn. But many are, but you just don't want to assume. And I guess, and then I say I specialize in that area, and do a lot of speaking and stuff like that. And that's really where I'd leave it, at a barbecue.
Sounds good. So before we get into some of the nitty gritty of how to use LinkedIn, because I think that everyone would love to hear your take on how to best use LinkedIn to grow a business, maybe let's take a step back and hear about your story and where it all began. I do detect that you've got a bit of an accent there, so maybe take us way back to the start and let's hear the story behind the story.
Okay, sure. Well, I was born in England, as you guessed. I thought I'd got really Aussie accent, but it clearly creeps back every now and then. When I was 5, we moved to Hong Kong. My dad we were in quite a lot of financial trouble, and he decided to take a risk and move to Hong Kong. He was in investment management, started his own business there. He was very successful in business. While we were living in Hong Kong, he was taking about 80 flights a year, drumming up business around Southeast Asia and the world. And by the age of 10, I was at boarding school in sunny Perth. And so I would see my parents probably 5 or 6 times per year after that stage. And like I struggled with when he was traveling a lot as a kid. And then I struggled even more when I was at boarding school, and just like I was very interested in what he was doing. I connected with him through business, but I did always think, there must be a better way to grow a business than hopping on all these airplanes all the time and not being able to spend as much time as you'd like with your family. And so I went into university, decided to study finance because I wanted to be like my dad. And I think the first lecture was derivatives. And I'm sitting at the back going, what the hell is this got to do with making money? And so I switched to marketing because it just looked like a sort of fun, easy enough course to do. Was still very interested in business. And my dad had started building villas in Thailand, and he was struggling to sell them. He'd built 93 pool villas. That was his idea of retirement. And so I said, hey, Dad, why don't I do some online marketing for you? And very quickly we were getting 10 leads a day from my search engine optimization work, but he still wasn't selling anything. So when I finished uni, I went up and started doing sales for him. We sold them out within one high season. I'm bragging now, but we did, we did 5 or 6 other property developments, and my career in marketing had started. But the interesting thing was I studied marketing at university for 5 years. I was already ordering pizza on the internet, but we did not one unit on internet marketing, so I didn't really learn anything about marketing. I learned a lot of other things at university, but it was all by, just learning how to get in front of more people, learning how to get more leads. And, I was recruited by a company in Hong Kong that heard I can get real estate websites to the top of Google. And then as I'm pretty much moving to Hong Kong for my new glamorous job, they had 150 agents. It was a big company, Hong Kong Homes. Google updates its algorithm. And so all of a sudden what they've been recruiting me for, I couldn't do anymore. So I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to learn how this Google advertising thing works. And so what I've learned with marketing is, in order for it to be successful, you need to be able to adapt. And I've been specializing in LinkedIn because that's for the last 8 years, because that's where we get the best results. And I'm just surprised it hasn't evolved yet. Because if it if door knocking becomes more effective, for example, then I'll probably move into, being the door knocking specialist. But LinkedIn just is going from strength to strength at the moment.
Amazing. So can I just go back to your boarding school days?
Sure.
Do you think that shaped you in any way, going to a boarding school? What was that like? I'm fascinated.
It was definitely difficult at the start. I think 10's quite young. I miss my parents and that kind of thing. But you become independent at a much younger age. One of the other boarders was a bit older than me, but he was the grandson of the Sultan of Malaysia. And so
wow.
one of my first jobs was doing his homework for $20 a night. I was quite an entrepreneurial young man, and I'd get $50 for an assignment. And I managed to convince him as well that it's not good for me to get too good at marks, because then it would be obvious that he's cheating. So that was quite good. But I think, you become, like, if I compare my life now with a lot of the day boys, you do become a lot more independent. Obviously, international travel is not something that I'm not familiar with. And I think that maybe you think outside the box more, and you're not so limited in what your career path might be. Having said that, I did, end up in a job, and the company I was working for in Melbourne had financial difficulties. And so this is crazy, but like I was the best salesperson in the company, but because of the financial troubles, I hadn't been paid in 2 or 3 months. And so I'm $20,000 in debt, haven't paid my rent. So I've got an eviction notice to deal with. My electricity was just cut out. And then I quit my job. So, I'm unemployed. This is the environment I found myself in Melbourne. And,
wow.
I was at the age where I asked mum and dad to help me, and they're like, well, you're old enough now, sort it out on your own. And that was that night I wrote my business plan, and the next day I started Bibby Consulting. So, what was a very challenging period for me was the reason that I, have started my business, started on my entrepreneurial journey, because I guess it's quite scary when you've got a 9 to 5 and you've got all that security to take the leap, unless you've got some money behind you or something.
It's really interesting because a lot of the millennials I speak to have a similar story. It's kind of like the launch pad is hitting rock bottom in a way, or like facing some kind of adversity. And then it's like, well, why the hell not? Which is contrary to what we're told about millennials, because apparently you're all a bunch of sissies. You're all snowflakes, and you don't like change and all of this other stuff. So what do you think about that? And while you're speaking, I'm just going to move, because I just need to turn my heater off, because it's making a lot of noise, and I'm going to get in trouble for background noise.
Well, I think that I guess it depends on your upbringing. Like, being able to adapt in adversity is something that I've had to practice over the years. Going to boarding school, or being thrown in the deep end, so to speak, and then having to work your way out, something that I have been familiar with. And I think that there's an illusion when you have a job that there's a safety net. And when you realize that the safety net's not actually real, and a lot of the guys, like taxi drivers are experiencing this with the Uber disruption. There's a lot of, there's so many industries that have been disrupted. You look at Amazon, you look at Airbnb, where they're disrupting all these industries, and all of a sudden these people who had jobs that they thought were secure realize that they're not. So when you realize the safety net's not real, all of a sudden you haven't got such a big thing to lose. There's not actually that much to lose. And so therefore you can actually just go out and give it all you've got. And I think also when you're in a desperate position, you stop caring. I don't know if you can swear on the show. I want to say give it.
Swear away.
You can just stop caring what other people think. And once you stop worrying about what other people think, I think you lose the fear of failure. Once you lose the fear of failure, you don't really mind if somebody says no, because you're just going to go to another person, or you're going to try again, different way. And I think that if you can change your relationship with failure so that it doesn't become a negative thing, it just becomes something that you go through on the path to success, then I think that, a lot of more people would be doing what they actually want to do, but a lot of them don't try because they're scared of getting it wrong, and what all their friends and parents will say if they fail.
I agree. I love it. And this is one of the things that I hear a lot with all of the millennials I speak to, and it's about failing fast and learning from it, which I think is the difference from being successful and disruptive and just staying in that 9-to-5 job that you hate for the rest of your life. And I think that's why some of the older generations really get annoyed with young millennials, because you guys have the balls to just go, you know what, I'm gonna bet the farm, or I'm going to just go all in. And I think there's an element of jealousy there.
Well, people have a bias towards what worked in the past. Like, we'll have it as well, millennials. I already do. Like, I don't get this TikTok thing. I want to, but, so we have a bias for what works in the past, and it's tempting to hold on to that and dismiss whatever's coming around the corner if you don't understand it. And that's what's happened with a lot of the older generations. And I love it when I do a seminar and there's guys in their 50s and 60s there, but it doesn't happen that often, who are actually interested in learning, because they're just as capable as anyone else to pick up social media. It's just that they're a lot of the guys in the older generations are very much attached to the old way of doing things. And unfortunately, the old way of doing things is not really working anymore. Like, the days of interrupting people through marketing, they're not completely over, but they're definitely numbered. We've got so much more control over where we spend our attention now. And just because if you're in your 50s or 60s, you may not be clued up on how to use LinkedIn or Instagram yet, doesn't mean that there aren't millions of other people that are in the same age demographic that are learning how to use these platforms and being able to consume information at their own speed and on their own watch.
I love it. So now let's move into LinkedIn and learning about LinkedIn, because I think that a lot of people think that, this is what I used to think until I started learning about the power of LinkedIn. I used to just think it was a great place. It was like a resume holder. It was like a giant database of people and their resumes, and it was great for recruitment. And that was I don't even know how long LinkedIn has been around, but I think that's the old thinking around what it is. But what's your take on what it really is?
Well, that's what LinkedIn thought it was when they started it as well. I've read their second business plan when they did their second round of capital raising, and it's like, okay, we're going to set up this Rolodex of CVs. The recruiters will use it to find talent.
Yeah.
And there was no mention of salespeople or marketers. So when guys like me came along and we're like, oh, you can use this to find prospects and reach decision makers in businesses, they're going, oh, okay, there's another market here. And so they've developed these other products which are slowly starting to get better. But for a long time, and still today, we can use LinkedIn for free to get in touch with the CEO of Westpac, the marketing director at BHP. You can be laser targeted with it. And we found that with our clients that are either in business to business, or they have, high lifetime value of their clients, and they want to reach like a specific industry, a specific person within that industry, and then LinkedIn is a very effective way to do it. It's cold calling. They say you can make an appointment with somebody on a telephone 1% of the time, which is probably, I think it's probably an exaggeration. But if you use LinkedIn, we get 15% is the average conversion rate. Some clients will get 70%, some 40%, but 15%. If it's 15 times what a cold call is, and it's just purely because, first of all, people will read their messages in their own time. You're not interrupting them. You go straight to the individual. You don't have to get past a gatekeeper. You don't have to, like when you cold call somebody, you have to tell them who you are and why you're calling. Whereas on LinkedIn, you don't have to tell them all that, because they can just click on your name and read your profile. So it's just a lot easier for people to communicate, and it's totally acceptable to network there. I think on Facebook, if I messaged the CEO of Westpac, for example, and said, hey, mate, I could help you with your marketing, let's have a coffee. I feel like it's inappropriate. But whereas on LinkedIn, he could read my profile and go, do you know what? Let's see what this guy's got to say.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the evolution of what LinkedIn has become is quite extraordinary and very different to what it started out as. Like most of these kind of social media platforms. But fast forward to now, what are some of the etiquette that you think is really important on LinkedIn as opposed to Instagram and Facebook? Because a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast will be millennials and they'll have businesses. So with Instagram, it's totally okay to kind of put naked photos of yourself and show who you really are and swear and do all of these really personal things and build this connection with your audience. Is that the same on LinkedIn, or would you say that there's a line?
Excuse me. It depends on your industry and also your personal brand. Like, I think it's cool to do some of those things if it's part of your personal branding strategy. You got to be very careful with things like swearing and stuff like that. Like, I think if you're going to use it, you have to use it in a way which adds value to what you're doing, like for emphasis or what have you. So I certainly tone things back on LinkedIn than I do on Instagram. The way I normally divvy up my content is whatever's not appropriate for LinkedIn goes on Instagram. but I guess it's a business site, but it's a social media site. So you want to find the balance between being professional, using correct spelling and going emojis when you don't know people, if you're writing a letter to somebody, but then not making it like an email with all these long words and long sentences so that someone's actually not going to bother reading it at all. It still needs to be social, short, succinct, but I think you just want to try and stay away from abbreviations and slang and emojis. And also, slang's a big one. Like, a lot of us, assume that people will understand what we're talking about, and maybe our friends on Instagram will because they're in our same age demographic. But a lot of people on LinkedIn probably don't know what BRB or LOL or LMAO stand for.
I agree. I think that knowing where to put what is a challenge that a lot of people struggle with LinkedIn. The other question I have is around this whole concept of pods, because a while back there was this thing. I was taught about LinkedIn that there was an algorithm that if your post got comments and likes in the first hour, it got pushed up the algorithm. And so what everybody did was create these pods where you had people doing all this posting in the first hour, and that was elevating your posts. Now, I've seen a very interesting video clip that you put on LinkedIn about this, saying that that's a stupid idea. So can you just tell us what your thoughts are?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I will say that I was a member of a pod a couple of years ago. I wasn't quite sure if I thought it was a good idea or not, purely because it makes sense on the surface level. However, what I've realized is what the algorithm's doing is it thinks that your content is liked more and can see that it's getting engagement, but it's seeing that it's liked more by a group of people, that the only reason they're liking your stuff is the value that you're providing them, is not the content. It's you liking their stuff. So it's showing your content to the people which aren't necessarily your clients, and it's going to show them to more of those people like that, because it thinks those are the people that like your content. And so what's going to happen is all these other people that could potentially be your clients, first of all, they're not necessarily seeing as much of your content because LinkedIn thinks it's not catered for them. And second of all, you're actually not going to know if your content is adding value to them, because you're getting engagement anyway. So how are you going to know? How are you going to improve? I'd much prefer to have no likes and no comments, so I know, okay, that's the base. And then next week I get one like and one comment. Okay, I've improved. Now I have something to measure my content success on. And so when I left that engagement pod, I went from having 150 odd likes and comments on each post to having like 20 or 30. And my ego took a bit of a hit, but I thought, I'm going to stick at this, and it built back up again. And still to this day, I don't think I necessarily have the same numbers that I used to when I was in the engagement pod for engagement. But my business is doing much, much better. I'm getting inquiries all the time because it's catered for the right target audience. And I just think that in the long run, anything that you do to manipulate attention is not going to serve you. It's very similar to like the Google updates that I was talking about earlier on in my career. You know, I was building backlinks to websites. Google updates its algorithm, and all of a sudden, you know, these websites could get blacklisted. So social media gets smarter to serve its users better content. If you're not actually adding value, if you're hacking attention, then you'll find that, you'll find that those pods won't work anymore. And all of a sudden, all those people who you thought were your friends will stop liking and commenting on your stuff because you're not doing it to them. Like, they're not really your friends. They don't really think your content's valuable. It's quite fake. And I think it's quite easy to get sucked into that because, you know, what is someone going to say who's in a pod watching this, seeing Nathaniel go, pods are crap. You're getting 150 likes a post. You think your LinkedIn's doing awesome. You're very proud of it. You tell everyone you've got all these followers on LinkedIn. But the question you've got to ask yourself is are you actually transferring it into business? Because if you're not, then you're wasting a lot of time. You're getting distracted. And I think there's, you're better off focusing on your real audience, your real target market for your business, and building a relationship with them. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be on social media. Like, it's a great way to build a relationship and start conversations with people. But at the end of the day, that's all we're doing. We're trying to build relationships. So, you know, it's a little bit like paying 100 people to come to the launch of your restaurant, you know, or 100 restaurant owners. You say, you come to my launch and I'll go to your launch. And then you have 100 people there. You spend all this money on food and, you know, you have a great party. But at the end of the day, are you going to get any customers for your restaurant? Who knows? Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. And I had that experience where I was in a pod and I was getting all this engagement, but I had to look at it and think, well, am I translating any of this engagement into actual leads? And
what
I was finding is I was getting a lot of tire kickers who just wanted to have a chat and talk shit, and just, you know, the time wasters, because they feel like they've got a relationship with you, right? Like, they feel like they know you if you're on there all the time. But I think it's I think it's trial and error as well. Like, last week I did a post and it was like really innocuous. I didn't really think it was that special, and I got like the most views and engagement I've ever gotten.
Awesome. That's so good.
It's just like, why did that happen? And then I saw your there's a video of you going around talking about the neuroscience behind content, and I've actually studied neuro-linguistic programming and neuroscience, neuro leadership, because I work in HR. So when you talked about that, I was like, oh my God, I've never even thought about the neuroscience of content. So can you...
Sorry, my mate wants to join me.
Oh, hello. Is it a boy or a girl?
Boy, his name's Marshall. So he's named after Eminem, which some of the millennials might get the reference.
Everyone who's listening, he has a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel on his lap, and his name's Marshall, and he's super cute.
I wasn't sure if he was starting to cry in the background because he was grabbing at my leg. But
that's all right. We're very dog friendly. I've got a Puggalia, which is a pug crossed with
beautiful
King Charles. Yep. So I love.
They're the best.
Yeah.
So look, I came across a guy called Kerwin Ray. I been to a couple of his events. I was fortunate enough to interview him for my LinkedIn Heroes series, and he told me about this thing called the mere exposure effect, which basically states that the more a brand gets exposed to your message, more a potential customer gets exposed to your brand, the more likely they are to trust you, be familiar with you, and buy from you as a preference than the guy that doesn't get all the exposures. And he was saying that, 20 years ago, you need 5 exposures. These days, it's, over 20 exposures that you need. And so one way to think about social media is, how do I get 20 exposures in front of somebody that, adds value, that's likely to make them like me and trust me, so that their preference is to do business with me. And and the way that I think about how do I make sure that the content is something that's going to make people like and trust me is it going to release dopamine, oxytocin, or endorphins which are positive brain chemicals, make people more receptive to ideas, make people more creative, make people more trusting, loving, so I think it's oxytocin that's released when a child's born in a mother, to help them when they're breastfeeding, to help them take care of their baby. These sort of brain chemicals are very handy if you're trying to build a relationship with somebody online, because most people are consuming content with stress chemicals running around, adrenaline and cortisol in their head, because they were stuck on the train or in traffic or at an airport, and they don't look very happy if you see them there consuming content on their phone. And so if you can transform that over time, they're going to like and trust you. And like you said at the start, I feel like I already know you because, I've seen some of your content. I mean, if somebody is bothering to consume the content, that's the sort of relationship that you can build with people on social media. And so you can build these positive brain chemicals very easily through storytelling. I think storytelling is a really underrated a skill to be able to, share your message in a way that people are going to remember, because the chances are that if you give them facts, figures, and statistics and tell them what to do without telling them why, people are likely to forget it very easily. Whereas if you generate some sort of emotion, then through stories, then they're more likely to remember you. And that's really where I think you can start to build a relationship with an audience. And then it's just about trust as well. Like being able to deliver value consistently it's not a one-hit wonder. Like you've got to be able to do it in a way that people are, can consume on a consistent basis. They know what to expect. So whether it's posting once a day or once a week or even once a month, I think the most important thing is you just are consistent with it so people know what to expect from you.
Amazing. So it sounds like it's really important that you make people feel something when they're consuming your content, whether it's making them feel happy and positive emotions or negative emotions. Sometimes you want to get people to have a reaction because when you can get people to feel something, then that creates a response in them that they're going to remember.
Yeah, and there's something to relate to, like on a human level, like that. The video that most people remember of mine, and they say, "Oh, I really love that video," is the one where I talk about how I started my business in debt, and I was quite desperate at that time, and people go, "Look, they come up to me and they say, I went through a similar situation. I could relate to that." And that builds a really deep connection and a bond, rather than like me telling you the 3 ways to generate leads on LinkedIn. I mean, unless I have some sort of story attached to it, it's likely that people won't remember that and won't mention it when they meet me.
I love it. No, I love storytelling. I think it's really important for people to connecting to their own story as well, because I think people forget, and a lot of people don't want to overshare. But I think in this day and age, being vulnerable and raw and telling people the story behind the story, they'll inevitably be able to connect with you and feel like they know you personally, which is the trust.
And like, it doesn't have to necessarily be about you. I mean, stories could be, about other people. It could be about people using your product. There's stories everywhere. If you just get in the habit of looking for them, I think it's handy to have like a database or of sorts full of stories. There was a test. I'll just share this with you quickly. There was a guy on eBay who had 200 products that he bought for $1 each, and he got 200 volunteers who were authors to 200 authors to write stories attached to these products. So like there might be like an ornament of a horse's head, and an author would write a story about how an old man used to like hold this head while he was writing his poetry, before he died, and what have you. And they managed to sell, on average, each of those products that were bought for $1 for $65 on eBay, just with a story in the description. So it's just a case study, really, to show the value of stories, that they can, you can sell things for so much more once they've got some meaning attached to them.
Yeah, no, I love it. So for people out there who are shit at stories, who think that they've got no stories,
they're wrong for starters. Everyone's got stories.
Is there any science behind finding and connecting with your own personal story. I mean, I do a lot of leadership training, and we do a lot of stuff about purpose, and we do a thing called narrative therapy, where you get people to think about like big moments in their life and reflect on it. But that's kind of a different thing. But do you know of any kind of ways of people to find these stories? Because I think some people are naturally really good at it, and other people just sit there and go crickets.
Yeah, I think it's something that does take practice. You know, that story about starting my business, I told for the first time on a podcast like 5 years ago, and he goes, "Oh, that was a really good story at the end." And so I've been telling it more and more since then, and I've practiced it, and I kind of I'm now quite comfortable sharing it. But I think that it does take practice, and maybe start by telling other people's stories. Like you'll find me post about people I don't necessarily know. Like I've shared things like how Eminem started his career, Jim Carrey, sharing their stories. And then you find things in your own life that, you know, where you've overcome challenges that you can share as well. I guess, yeah, like you say, being vulnerable and sharing things that maybe you think, oh, I can't share that on LinkedIn. You know, those are probably the things that you do want to share, but it's not so much about what happened, and it's about what you learned. And so if you can think about, you know, some of the things that you admire in your business or in your personal life that you've learned through making mistakes, and you share that story of how you made the mistake and what you learned from it, then all of a sudden it makes you seem more trustworthy, because people go, okay, well, he's human. He's not just telling us how good he is. He's, you know, and most of the time, if you hear interviews with, you know, Elon Musk or, you know, Obama or like Grant Cardone, all these famous people, it's quite interesting because I've interviewed quite a few of these famous entrepreneurs, and what you find is, oh, they're just like me. Like they've made all these mistakes as well. Once they were homeless, once they didn't have any money, and all they've done is just tried 100 different things, and then they've worked out what works for them. And we all do the same. We're all learning. So we've all got stories. It's just that some of us think that our stories aren't worth hearing. And that, you know, that's the challenge that you've got to get over.
Yeah, good advice there. I think everybody needs to connect with their story, particularly in business. So going back to LinkedIn and the best way to use it to build a business, like how often should people be posting? What types of stuff should they be putting up there? I think like with Instagram, it's a very visual platform that you've got to have your grid right with the pretty pictures. Whereas what's LinkedIn about? What does LinkedIn want to see from influencers or you know, people that are really successful on there?
Yeah, well, what it's looking for is relevant content. So when you go to the newsfeed on LinkedIn, the default is sort by relevancy, and you can change it to recency, which, you know, basically shows you the latest post. So if you're posting, you know, every day just to try and get at the top of the feed, that's probably not going to work unless, you know, you really know your audience and you really know what you're doing with your content. In terms of like, it's more about the quality of the content. And so I think it starts with building a network which is targeted. What do most people do when they get on LinkedIn? They look at their invitations and they accept. They may reject a couple, but in that instance, they are being reactive. They're not being proactive. You know, if you target dentists, and chances are, you know, you're going to get 1 in 100 dentists who request you, but there'll be a lot of salespeople, there'll be a lot of recruiters. And then you wonder why LinkedIn doesn't work for you, because those people who are in your connections are the people seeing your content, like, or more likely to see your content. So if you're proactive and you're sending a connection request, so you build an audience of dentists, then find out the content that resonates with them by testing and measuring is a great way to do it. So in that instance, like, how quick do you want to learn? Because if you want to learn quickly, post a lot and find out what works. The other way is you can ask, you know, you can call them up and say, hey, you know, I noticed you're in my network. Do you mind if I just ask you a couple of questions so I can post content that's going to add value? And say, okay, well, what are your concerns in, you know, the marketing world, or what keeps you up at night? What's the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome? What TV channels programs do you like? What, you know, who else do you follow? And then you quickly will learn what they're interested in and what will add value to their lives. But I think most people, they are reactive. They have an audience. It's wishy-washy. There's just a whole bunch of, they're trying to cater for a small portion of it, but wondering why they're not getting engagement. And then it doesn't matter how often you post, because not many people are going to be seeing it at all. So I think that, you should be doing it at least, if you want to get good at it, you should be doing it at least every 2 or 3 days, because you've got to have that much feedback to be able to get to a point where you understand your audience so well that you know that a post will reach them.
Yeah, makes sense. And is it like Instagram and all those kinds of platforms where if you have people liking and commenting, you need to actively respond and engage with them and reply to every single comment and do that whole... Because, I mean, that could be massive. Like, that's a lot of work for some people. Like, I'm sure that certain people are like, well, I don't have time to do that. That's just ridiculous.
Well, I mean, like if you want to build an audience or relationship with thousands of people on social media, like building a relationship with thousands of people does take a lot of work. And if they're going to take the time to comment, then the way to keep them as a follower and an active subscriber is to respond to their comments. And and if they say, oh, thank you for posting this content, I found it really valuable, all you do is say, well, I'm glad you liked it, thanks for watching. And then they're much more likely to comment again in the future, and much more likely to become a client, much more likely to sing your praises from the rooftops. But if you don't respond, then it's almost like, I don't really care what you got to say about my video, I'm just posting it for me. So it's very important. It's more important at the start when you're just starting to build an audience. You would see this on Instagram a lot, but like businesses that are starting out with an Instagram account, same as LinkedIn, they spend all this time and money trying to create this awesome content, awesome photographs, but then you look at their last post, it's got 2 comments on it and they haven't bothered replying. And I say to them, those 2 comments are actually the most important thing that you could be doing for your whole social media strategy, because those 2 people care, and you've basically not shown them that you care back, which I think is a massive shame, because if you don't build a relationship with the people that give you attention, you're constantly going to have to be chasing new attention. And so you're never actually going to build an audience that's engaged. You might build an audience, but half of them are tuned out because you never really built that trust or relationship with them. Yeah,
makes sense. And it looks like you're building a very close relationship with Marshall there.
Sorry. I'm just trying to keep him occupied.
Oh, that's okay. He's still got like puppy teeth, like little pin teeth, or how old is he?
You'd be surprised how sharp they are.
Yeah.
He's 4 months.
Oh, is it? He's so cute. Is he fully grown, or has he still got some growing to do?
He's got some growing to do, yeah.
Oh, God, he's so cute. Anyway, we'll stop getting distracted by the dog. So if people are posting on LinkedIn and they're getting engagement, how do they actually turn that into clients or make money? Because I think...
Great question.
I found there's a lot of people who are doing all this stuff on LinkedIn, and I was one of them last year, did a whole bunch of work on LinkedIn, was posting, was in a pod, but at the end of the day, it wasn't translating into business or leads, like maybe a little bit here and a little bit there. And it's funny because it's translating into business now, and I'm not really even doing anything.
Yeah.
So I just don't understand. Can you please enlighten me?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely ways to do it through content by posting things that are more geared around the problem that your target audience has, and you'll get inbound leads like that. I think it's a lot more challenging to do it that way for most people. And you've got to, in 4 or 5 years ago, you could not post content on LinkedIn. Well, you could do articles to start with, but there was, at the start you couldn't post articles. So all it was a way to connect and message people. And so that's how I was generating 100 leads a month to start with, is by connecting with the right people, sending them a message saying, thanks for connecting. I'd like to find out more about what you do, to see if there's an opportunity for us to help you. Can we hop on a telephone call? So I think the goal should be to take the conversation off of LinkedIn and onto a phone call, so that you don't waste each other's time if it's not a good fit. I think you've got to be okay with the fact that not everyone's going to have a need. It's social media. They may be like the right target audience, but I mean, if you help businesses get more customers and they don't want more customers, you're just going to be annoying and wasting your time. So you just have to find out. And I think the best way to do it is on a telephone call. So showing interest in your audience and showing interest in the people that you connect with, and finding a reason to take the conversation offline is what's missing for most people. Like, I think even some people would be getting messages on LinkedIn saying, oh, you do LinkedIn consulting, how much does that cost? And some people might just respond and say, here's our pricing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say, well, here's my link to my calendar, or when suits you for a call, then you have much more control over the sales process, and you can ask them, what they're looking for, what's their decision-making criteria. And I think that's the piece that's missing for most people. But it's a great question. I think that everything you do on social media must be generating a return on investment, because it's so easy to waste time on social media if you don't know what you're doing. If you don't have a system, if you don't have a strategy, and you're just scrolling through the news feed trying to find clients, the chances are your time's probably better spent elsewhere.
Yeah. Interesting. It's a massive beast. Like, how many people are on LinkedIn now? Do you know off the top of your head?
It's around 670 million members. But what's interesting, because it's been quite, it's grown quite quickly, mainly because they were fined actually $12 million a few years ago for emailing everyone's. So like, if I join, it would email everyone that I've got in my contact list on my emails and invite them from Nathanial wants to connect with you on LinkedIn. And that's how they grow their membership so quickly.
Wow.
So people would sign up, but then they weren't active. They weren't using it. Yeah. Whereas now, in the last 2 years, we've seen session time, which is the amount of time each person spends on LinkedIn, triple. So people are spending 3 times as much time on the platform, which means it's actually engaging. People are actually consuming content there, which is a great sign. It means that LinkedIn's giving users better content. People are more active there, and they've all got a business hat on, so you can communicate to them in a much more direct way than you can on other social channels. I think it's fantastic, and it's just going to keep growing with the Microsoft acquisition, all the integrations that are happening there, and they've just introduced stories like Instagram has in Australia and Brazil and the UAE, which will on Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg came out and said that stories get 50% more engagement than a normal post. So you can just imagine what, the impact that's going to have when it's rolled out globally. At the moment, I get like 100 views on my story, which isn't a lot, but you've got to remember that the only people seeing it are in Australia, Brazil, and UAE. Like, when it's open up to the whole world, that number will be a lot higher. Very similar to when Instagram first introduced them, I expect.
Amazing. Very interesting. I didn't know that Microsoft had acquired LinkedIn.
Yeah, $26 billion. It's a bit of change.
Wow. Was LinkedIn owned? Is it an American-owned company? Where was it started?
It started in the US, Silicon Valley. Yep.
Wow. I mean, don't a few companies own everything anyway? Isn't that the way the world works?
Well, there's a few big fish. Like, Google's got YouTube. Facebook's got Instagram. So they're all battling it out. At the moment, Facebook's leading the charge, but in the business context, I think that there's not really much to compete with LinkedIn in a business networking sort of capacity. Like, I think Facebook ads are fantastic and all that kind of stuff, but you're never going to get the same audience there. Like, the statistics say that people or business people trust the content on LinkedIn 3 times more than other social channels. So, I mean, even if it costs $15 a click on LinkedIn and $5 a click on Facebook, the value is kind of the same, because people are going to trust what's being said there more.
Amazing. Very interesting. So, just to kind of wrap it all up, what would your tips be to any millennials out there who are thinking about starting a business?
Well, I think that if failure is not an option, then neither is success. So, when I was young and I started some of my first entrepreneurial journeys, as soon as I hit a roadblock and realized I wasn't going to become a millionaire overnight, I stopped. And what I didn't realize is, these things adapt and they evolve and they lead to other opportunities. So you don't know what you don't know. And I think that you learn by experience. So just dive in. Don't be afraid to make mistakes fast. keep your team nimble, keep your overheads nimble while you're young, do all the hard things like, picking up the telephone, hustle, be audacious with your goals, work your ass off. And social media has enabled us to be able to reach a worldwide audience if you're good enough. And so I think that taking the time to understand where your customers are spending their time and the nuances of that platform and how to add value there will mean that you're able to bootstrap your growth, like you're able to grow without spending a lot of money. And you'll find that the audience that you build will be like raving fans that'll talk about your business and hopefully will be your supporters for many years to come. So that's my 2 cents. And I admire anyone that does it, because it is a big challenge, takes a lot of resilience, and a lot of naysayers will be saying you can't do it. But I think that if you believe in yourself, it doesn't really matter what they think. And I would encourage you to give it a crack.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving us some insight into your story, and also sharing some pretty hot tips around LinkedIn. I know I've learned some stuff today, but if people want to find you and possibly engage you, if Bibby Consulting, where can they find you?
So on LinkedIn, obviously, Nathanial Bibby. I'm on all the other social channels. YouTube's a big one for me. We've got the podcast, the Nathanial Bibby podcast, which is pretty cool. And then on Instagram, I'm Nat Bibby. So not Nathanial Bibby, Nat Bibby. So you can find me there as well. I keep my eye on all the social channels. That's the best way to get in touch with me and to consume some of my content. And I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think it's great what you're doing here and educating millennials on some of the positive stories that are out there about entrepreneurs kicking ass. So thank you for including me.
My pleasure. It was fantastic having you on. Thank you.
No worries. See ya.
Bye-bye. Thanks.